Welcome to the Applied Blockchain podcast, where blockchain technology and innovation are in the spotlight. My name is Ben-Ari, and I'm the founder and CEO of Applied Blockchain, and I'll be your host as we dive into relaxed conversations with industry experts and thought leaders to get their views on what they're building, the Web3 ecosystem and its transformative impact on the modern world. Vikram Seth from Shell, welcome to the Applied Blockchain podcast.
Thank you, Eddie. Good to see you again.
Vikram, we've obviously known each other for a while, but for the audience, please tell us a bit about yourself. I guess what you do at Shell, what you do, what your interest is in blockchain, how you got into the space. Let's get started.
Yeah, so I lead the Blockchain Web3 team at Shell, and very much personally interested in how we can use emerging technologies for the energy transition. So I've been in the energy space pretty much since university, and even in university I focused on energy and environmental economics. I even moved to Norway just to make sure that I could be in an environment where they're really focusing on the Human Development Index, sustainability, powering most of their economy with hydropower. So very deep in that space. And
so that was a learning experience there?
So I did my master's there actually, and already at that point focused on wind, so wind power and the integration with battery storage. And actually, there was I read quite a lot of books which brought me into the space of incentive design and incentive mechanism design and all of that, complementary currencies, which were really analog at that time. But that's what really sparked my interest, which ultimately led me into Web3 probably about 10 years later.
Right. Okay. No, it's interesting that, because a lot of people in the space come at it from different angles, right? And it sort of clicks or resonates with something that they were probably doing or thinking before. For me, it was as a technologist, I was doing integration work between systems, and I saw this as a way of companies integrating with each other in like an extra tool in that toolbox.
Yeah.
So obviously the incentives is another one.
And I think so. You're 100% right, because the space of Web3 is itself an integrated system. We're trying to integrate so many different concepts in, and it can get really confusing at times, right? Because there's always this debate about, is AI inside Web3 or is Web3 sort of adjacent to AI? Or same thing with metaverse, right? Is metaverse inside Web3, or should we talk about Web3 and the metaverse? And I think what we're really kind of hitting at is that we are talking about the next generation of the internet, and we're talking about the next generation of how we coordinate our data, how we coordinate our systems, and how we also ultimately coordinate our relationships, commercial, contractual, but also our relationship across technologies. And also, and the piece that really interested me was this value piece, right? How does the technology help to change our relationship with value? And so this complementary currency thing that I was mentioning I was really interested in how can you design a currency system or a complementary currency or a token, right, which incentivizes sustainable behavior. Right. And so there's so much in there. When we think of, for example, like Web3 for loyalty schemes, well, when you're also talking about psychology, you're also talking about marketing, and then that translates into how you actually implement that. And so it's a absolutely fascinating space. And when you start to layer on the systems, thinking especially in the energy space, I think I'm already jumping towards like where my vision keeps going towards something like this concept of the transactive energy system, where you have a stack with blockchain at the bottom, essentially ensuring the integrity of your data flows throughout your ecosystem and value chain. Yep. But then you stack on top of that IoT sensors, edge computing, which are sitting on our devices or capturing real-world, real-time data, and then visualize that in something like a digital twin, or in increasingly virtual reality space, whether that's the metaverse or with an Apple Vision Pro, or simply a digital twin on your screen. And then you layer on the insight. At the moment, we're really deriving insights using AI, but obviously with future integration, and we're far closer now to just automating that entire thing, so that AI kind of sits on top of the stack, putting the insights out, but then feeding back in and essentially orchestrating changes within the tech. So I think that's the direction where we're going. What I'm also interested there is, so how does that actually interact with the user and your psychology? Yeah. And so in the space of energy, there's this whole thing of demand response. So you want the user to adjust their energy consumption behavior based on the information they know. And based on this stack I just talked about, the user or the company or the utility operator, blah, 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 whoever it is.
Or the device with AI in it or whatever.
You get so much richer data and information out of that, that now you can make a much more informed decision. So
like I'm a washing machine, and I'm not going to start until the time when I've worked out I've got the lowest cost power or something like that.
Exactly, and I think that's where that's basically what smart meters supposed to help us do. And they are doing that, but they're not smart enough, because does the washing machine actually interact with your fridge, or does it understand everybody else's washing machine when that's turning on and off? Does that actually understand what the energy pricing is across the local region that you're in?
Yes.
Are we integrating into there the fact that you might be a prosumer with a solar panel on your roof? And we have the building blocks all in place for this now. Yeah. But we still need that sort of orchestration.
They're not connected.
They're not connected as yet.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, right? We probably need a week. But just
whet your appetite.
Just to make a start on that. So I guess going back to what you said at the very beginning, the internet is a way of exchanging information, right? It's not really it doesn't really give us the tools to exchange value. What we're doing on the internet usually is going through the internet, communicating with an institution, which might itself then be talking to other institutions, who are managing the exchange of value offline, effectively.
Yeah.
Right. And what we can do with the blockchain is we can exchange value potentially peer-to-peer or through contract and so on. We can do this more efficiently. And then that value could be payment for energy, right? For energy and energy services, and that opens up, that, as you say, it's part of a stack, right? So if you have the payment as a base layer and that kind of secure sharing of information, that hardening through the cryptography of where information has come from and who owns what, which is where the payment piece comes in, then that's a layer of certainty there, right? Yeah. Extra certainty provided through the cryptography and the blockchain that uses the cryptography. Then I guess we have sources of information, right? These could be different entities, which could be, they could have their identities and so on, or it could be devices, right? It could be meters, as you say, or devices that with consumers, or devices in a supply chain, and certainly for a company like Sherry, there's no end of machines and devices and things that provide information,
and across the whole energy industry and beyond as well.
Yeah. We have a project which we haven't brought to the podcast series yet, where we have transport with sensors on the transport, and that's going to the blockchain. And so there's packages which go through a number of different providers, and rather than getting information from each of those providers where their incentives might not be aligned, I know, for example, if something goes wrong with the package, you're relying on them to give you that information. Here we have the sensors all the way through the journey communicating, and the data being anchored in a blockchain to give the guarantees about the transport. And that's transport for goods that need to be in controlled environments during the transport, for example. So these kind of things, I think, also a similar thing with sensors in the energy world, as you say, consumption, production, what's available, and so on. That also plays into this, so that you can sort of trigger movement of value based on those as well, right?
And I think to come down to zoom in. I mean, we could easily be here for a while, but I think to zoom in on that a little bit, one of the reasons that maybe this kind of cross ecosystem sharing hasn't necessarily taken off until more recently is because who do I want to really share my data with, right? Like, do I really want to share it with my suppliers and my customers who might also be working with competitors? And this is where, the kind of public, permissionless, open nature of blockchains can be very helpful, but needs to be tempered with the privacy preservation mechanisms and ensuring sensitive data isn't leaked, etc. And that's where I think now we're in a much better space with this, with zero knowledge proofs and and other such technologies.
You're giving me a segue into
yeah. But I think the point is that we go through this evolution step by step, where the ideal is an entirely open ecosystem, but we're trying to layer that onto a legacy kind of a world which is focused much more on holding onto IP, but also very sensitive to the data, and then also in the light of just the kind of data that we now have on customers, it's really important to be sensitive about that not being leaked. And so having that now privacy layer actually enables that cross ecosystem sharing without revealing and disclosing sensitive data, by kind of adhering to things like GDPR and the privacy that your customer needs, but that also you need and that your supplier needs, and it kind of opens up the ecosystem to be able to enable that data sharing, which then allows that data to flow through that entire stack. Because if you don't have that data from the whole ecosystem, it's very difficult to manage it at that full stack level.
I completely agree with you. I think it's a little bit like the internet, right? We kind of had the web pages of newspapers and things at the beginning, but then it wasn't until we had SSL and kind of the ability to encrypt data securely over the internet and so on, and these protocols, that we could start having, logging into my bank account, and completing purchases with providing financial information and so on, right? And working sensitive data.
And so that's where the value bit comes in as well, right? Like if I want to exchange value, but I also, that value is maybe layered with some sensitive metadata, etc. And this is something that we need to understand better, because it fits differently depending on the actors we're talking about. And how do you enable KYC? How do you enable ensuring you're compliant with AML whilst preserving privacy, but disclosing what you need to disclose to be able to enable those transactions to take place? And it's very different. Sorry, I've fully jumped in here, but it's very different for a peer-to-peer transaction than it is for a corporate entity to get involved in that. You do need all of these safeguards in place.
I mean, I think ultimately we'll all want them anyway, once they become available and people have kind of become more aware of this. I think we're in a stage now where people assume, oh, my data's everywhere and I just have to live with that. I think no. I think people will come and say, hang on, if it's not this generation, it'll be the next one. Just like, with other things in life, where they'll say, hey, previous generation, what were you thinking? And so I think consumers will demand it as well, as there's more and more data, and potentially more and more things go wrong with the data, right? Which is really what's happening anyway, right? We're getting more and more of these leaks. So I think once there are viable alternatives to this, then I think it's also true for the consumer. But I think for the commercial, I've always thought, and our customers have always included enterprises and corporates, as well as sort of working in the crypto world. I've always assumed there's a limit to what kind of activity you'll be able to do as a commercial entity, especially financial transactions, without privacy. And that's why we've focused on that problem in particular as well. But again, going back to the internet, I think the important thing is you want the security, right? You want the security guarantees that you get from a blockchain, right? That you get from the public networks. You don't want to undermine that. And then you want to layer on that a privacy capability, so that for those who want it or those who need it for particular transactions or particular activity, you can do that. And then, as you said, you've then got the ability through cryptography to say, well, I can prove to you that these checks have been made on me without showing you all the data. And then you can verify credentials. The reason why I think that's important is so that you can automate the activity on chain. So you can have a smart contract that says, well, I can see all these checks have been done, even though all the data here. So I'm going to move these assets now, right?
And so what I'm really interested in seeing from the industry is, so what does that enable, especially if I think again about energy, but this is again far beyond energy, in the DePIN space, decentralized physical infrastructure networks, right? So that's essentially exactly, it kind of brings together a few of the things I was talking about. How do you incentivize different behaviors amongst actors in an ecosystem, but now not just sort of virtually with Bitcoin and incentivizing mining, for example, but broader than that? How do I incentivize whether somebody hooks up their solar panel to my system or not? And this is where DePIN can kind of come in to that. How do I, and one of the early examples of DePIN was the Helium network, right? But so how do we go?
Which we should probably describe for people that are so familiar.
which is essentially incentivizing people to hook up essentially a wireless router, so that you're adding another node to the network, and then you're incentivized by Helium tokens for hooking up your router and providing internet connectivity where you might not otherwise have it. So just take that example of a router and replace it with a solar panel, replace it with your EV battery from your car or your power wall at home. And you're not just using these now for yourself, you're actually hooking them up to a system. And that system might not just be the grid, it might be the grid plus this kind of DePIN network. Where you're bringing your asset, right? Yeah. But you're not just bringing your asset and hoping that, relying on, let's say, a single centralized actor like the utility maybe to incentivize you, but actually the community itself can incentivize you. And I think we still need to understand better how these things look like. Helium is a great example of kind of an early view of that. I think also DAOs are a great example, minus the physical infrastructure piece of the governance part of that. How do you incentivize people to come into a community? But where I want to understand how this plays out is I think these things start to layer on each other. You take something from something like helium, you take another element from DAOs with governance, etc., and then you bring in like the real world assets piece. And I think that's what DePIN sort of starts to look like. It's the closest I can see right now to this kind of transactive energy stack that I was talking about.
Okay, and I guess the efficiency is that rather than plugging my solar panel to the utility and waiting for the utility, which is effectively a black box for me, to send me here's what you've earned or here's what you need to pay, I've actually got a network where that is done completely transparently for me, and it's done in a completely automated and autonomous way, because my devices are plugging in, they're effectively providing the data, and we can see that it's come from them, and then the payout, as you say, can happen through a DAO, which is effectively a smart contract. It gets the proven activity that's happened on the device, and then can move tokens around on that basis. So we get the whole reward financial system plugged into evidenced activity by physical devices, and all of that can just be automated.
Yeah, right? and maybe to make that point, so and there the setup might look more like a microgrid setup with your neighbors and your local supermarket, rather than needing everything to go through the local utility, which is essentially an actor at a higher level in the ecosystem. So you can have these sort of more local networks. And just to kind of relate this back to what I was talking about, complementary currencies, this is what we saw with, for example, the Brixton pound, which was, so literally what it says on the tin, which was a local currency for Brixton in London.
When was this?
This was in around the time I was reading about all of this, and I think it was probably around 2009 to 2012 sort of time.
Really?
Yeah. So, and the whole point of that was exactly that, to incentivize transactions within the local community. That in this case, the local community was defined as Brixton, so they signed up, local shops, basically, the hairdresser, the corner shop.
You could only spend these in Brixton.
You could, and that's the point. So you could spend your normal pounds, but you could also spend these local Brixton pounds, and that would circulate only within this economy, right? Which meant you had to spend it only in this economy, but it created this kind of parallel but complementary system, which incentivized spending within Brixton. Now think about the shop, right? When the shop receives this Brixton pound, they can't pay their taxes in it. They can't pay somebody in, Clapham with it. Right. So they have to also spend that pound within Brixton. So what you've done is you've boosted that local economy. And the point here is that it's a system which was specifically designed with an incentive geared towards a single outcome, which was boost the Brixton economy. And that's conceptually what we're talking about here. Right? When I'm paying my utility, that utility is potentially a national utility. So they can use that to pay their taxes, to pay back their debt, to pay back their investors. But what if I'm paying a token within a smaller community, and now that community spends it within each other? And so the vision is a bit different. And the point is here that you can design that token and that token economy to achieve whatever outcome it is you want to achieve, tokenized carbon credits. As a community, and whatever that community wants to define it as. And that could be dictated by the entity that's launched this, or it could be, again, in the case of a DAO and a governance, community-based governance. And, and obviously this concept is what we've seen in, for example, the tokenized carbon markets. Yeah, and this is essentially what the purpose of a DAO is. So I'm interested to see where this goes, how this goes.
That was going to be my next question, how far away are we from this?
So I think that the community level experiments, they're all already there, right? Like Gitcoin, for example, is essentially following this kind of concept in funding projects, so providing grant funding to projects. Essentially, they distribute grants, but based on community votes and match funding partners. There's lots of experiments out there. I think when you say how far is this going to go, how much are enterprises and corporates going to get involved in that? And I think it's probably going to be more of a spin-off kind of thing and a side project, and I think you're going to see more kind of startups involved in that space. For example, I know that Fuse Energy, who I think we're in level 39 right now in Canary Wharf, and I think they're based here as well. They've recently kind of launched a project called Project 2050, which is essentially looking at, it's recently come out, so I don't know how far it goes in this concept, but from what I can see, it looks at something like this related to distributed energy resources, exactly what I was talking about, the solar, how do you connect the solar panel with the battery, etc. So I think, startups, more nimble players, those which are not heavily regulated, don't necessarily see, either can manage this risk in a different way,
or they're more prone to taking a risk on how this is going to play out.
I think we'll definitely see it build out first there, and corporates and enterprises may kind of keep an eye on those experiments and then dip their toes in again, obviously when things are de-risked a bit and the vision is a bit more clear, and we can understand, does it work, does it not work, does the community does the governance mechanisms work or not work, so it's really an experimental space. But I think this is the kind of thing that I'd be interested to see how it plays out in 10-15 years, and then the elements of this is what I think we are building towards today already.
Okay, very good. You touched on at the beginning. You touched on AI, right? And we had a guest in the last episode, on Blockchain ML, talking about AI agents that are incentivized through a Web3 platform. How do you see the interplay between the technologies?
I think they're intrinsically need to be linked. I think so. If I come back to, sort of that transactive energy system view a little bit, I think again the two things that I see that AI brings into this is, first of all, is the insights, and then you can almost think of, if you've got kind of like the AI black box in the middle, which could be your agent. The input is the insights, or the input is the data, which feeds out two outputs. One is insights, and the other one is automation, which acts on those insights. Which goes back in, and then that's how you kind of close the loop. How do you connect that in with Web3? Well, first of all, you can enact that automation using smart contracts. Where is the logic coming from? You can have that logic kind of fed in by AI, so it's dynamic. It's dynamic logic, not just static logic as well. But also, I think they work well within that whole stack of, again, that blockchain particularly is what is providing that security, the certainty, and the immutability of the data that's in this. That basically, if you think about sort of like the data lakes and the data that's being fed in, that data as well, you want to ensure has integrity in it. And then similarly,
because you're going to rely more and more on these AI outputs, to make or become autonomous decisions. So you want to make sure the
data has some integrity.
Exactly. You need it to be.
And similarly, if it's insights which are being produced, well, how do I distinguish between something which is a hallucination or something which is actually, this is what I actually got from the sensor or whatever. And obviously there's more to it than that. We see, for example, like Ocean Protocol and Fetch AI and Singularity kind of coming together there and looking at how you can do things like, again, the incentive. This is another piece, which if I zoom out from like how that infrastructure maybe works together, there's another piece there, which is, again, using the incentive mechanisms from Web3 to, for example, incentivize actors to put up their resources to provide computing power, which is then used to, solve AI,
to run these
to run the algorithms, etc. The other kind of completely tangent, interesting piece that I've seen, which maybe links a bit more again back to the energy space, is there's a startup called Deep Green, and they're looking at essentially putting data centers which are used for compute into swimming pools to use the waste heat from the swimming pool, from the data center, to heat up the swimming pool. And then what you can again do there is, well, how do you, and I don't think they're doing this bit yet. I think right now what they're doing is they're basically providing waste heat for free to the swimming pool to be able to find a place which hosts the data center so that they get free cooling.
Right? This could be the end of cold water swimming in the UK.
Yeah, well, exactly. So I think it's a win-win-win, right? But right now they're doing that for free because they get free cooling and the swimming pool or the leisure center gets free heating. But if you introduce tokens, you can create a token economy within that as well to incentivize things. So I think there's these innovations and seeing, coming back again to kind of the systems think and broadening out beyond just the very narrow kind of like, hey, blockchain first.
Yeah.
I'm going to shove blockchain at every problem that I see. But just kind of zooming out and thinking like, what's the story here?
Yeah.
What's the real problem here? And how can I maybe integrate these things together? And how do these technologies fit together?
Yeah. It's interesting because it's quite difficult to explain quite often, especially in the enterprise world. You can get you get tied into a specific process that's being done today, and you need to and people are looking to add value on that. Whereas really, this technology is quite transformative. You really have to step back and say, you're creating things. You're creating things now. You've got the technologies available to you now, blockchain, AI, and so on. What would this look like? Right?
Yeah, and I think for anybody who's really innovating in the space, it's alternating between that zoom in and zoom out. Because you're right, on a day-to-day basis, to do projects, to actually get POCs up and running and to get them to deployment, they have to be narrowly focused on a specific problem with a specific solution.
Yeah. With a valuable position to the business today. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. With one eye on that broader strategy and that vision that actually what we're doing here is a stepping stone to enabling that much broader, crazier future vision, which could take a very long time to get to. But each of these things are steps along the way.
Very good. Vikram, I'm going to call this end of part one because I think there should be another one. Just before you go, I always ask our guests if they've got some content that or source of content that they use or recommend. It could be a book, a podcast, any film, anything really. It doesn't even have to be work related.
Well, I think maybe keeping on the theme of what we've discussed here, I'll definitely say the book and series of books that inspired me into this kind of complementary currency space and the incentive mechanism that I talked about. So is basically from someone who was involved in the creation of the euro monetary system. And he kind of took a step back and looked at the system holistically and said, are we actually incentivizing just the same future system as what we've been doing in the past? Or do we want to incentivize sustainable behaviors, etc.? And so that is somebody called Bernard Lietaer. And he wrote a book called The Future of Money, and then the Sustainability of Money or Sustainability and Money. Okay. But basically, Bernard Lietaer, he's also got fantastic YouTube videos. He passed away a few years ago, but he's also the inspiration, or one of the inspirations behind Bancor Protocol, which is doesn't necessarily, on the face of it, seem like it fits.
I wondered where they got that from. Okay, very good, very good.
And I'd say the other thing, to maybe go on a different tangent, is around the kind of real energy systems thinking, is somebody called Nate Hagens, who has this concept called the Great Simplification, and he has a podcast by the same name. The Great Simplification. So again,
check these out. We'll put them in the show notes as well.
Yeah. So very interesting stuff to kind of think about.
Very good. Very good. Vikram, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you on.
Thank you, Eddie.